cold no longer hurt. 3 hours into the chase, Eva's body had surrendered to the January freeze nerves, too numb to register pain. Now the cold simply existed pressed against Evangeline Thorne's skin like something alive and hungry. She kept moving because stopping meant dying, and dying meant they won. Her left hand stayed locked against the swell of her belly, fingers splayed wide across fabric, stretched too tight for 7 months pregnant. Beneath her palm, 5 heartbeats pulsed in frantic rhythm, 5 separate souls fighting for space inside a body meant to hold one. 5. The midwife back in Hollow Creek had called her a liar when Eva first said it. Then the woman's face had drained white, and fresh snow hands trembling as they pulled back from Eva's stomach like they'd touched hot iron. She'd counted again and again, her lips moving in silent arithmetic that kept arriving at the same impossible sum. 5 distinct heartbeats. 5 lives that shouldn't exist. The midwife had crossed herself 3 times before fleeing the room. By sunset, the settlement council had convened. 18 men in their Sunday best seated in the meeting hall that still smelled of last week's barn dance. Eva had stood before them 7 months heavy with children they couldn't see but could no longer deny existed. Their faces ranged from fear to disgust to something harder, hate wrapped in scripture. Silas Grendel spoke first. The enforcer from the southern end of the hollow, a man whose grandfather had ridden with Quantrill's raiders and whose own hands weren't clean of wartime sins. He stood his bulk casting shadows across pine plank floors and pointed one thick finger at Eva's belly. "Quintuplets," he rasped the word ugly in his mouth. "Last time a woman in these mountains carried 5 was 1861. You all know what happened next. War came, brother killed brother. The mountains ran red for 4 years. The council nodded, old men remembering older stories passed down like heirlooms from fathers who'd lived through that particular hell. It's an omen, another elder added. The devil's mark, 5 where there should be 1. It ain't natural. It ain't right. Eva had tried to explain. Her husband William had been a good man, a God-fearing man who'd worked himself to death in the coal seams beneath Black Mountain. These babies were his last gift conceived before the mine had taken him and 40 others in a collapse that should never have happened. But they hadn't wanted to hear about William. They wanted the problem gone. The vote was unanimous. Exile before the next full moon or forced termination of the pregnancy. Their words spoken with the calm certainty of men who believed themselves righteous. Eva chose exile. She'd left Hollow Creek 3 days ago just after midnight, with nothing but layered clothes in the canvas pack William had carried during his mine surveying days. Inside, dried venison matches wrapped in oilcloth, his old hunting knife, and the leather-bound journal he'd kept during the last months of his life. The journal she hadn't been able to read yet. Couldn't bear to see his handwriting, still alive on those pages when he was 8 months cold in the ground. The hunting party found her trail by dawn. Silas Grendel led them. She'd heard his voice carried on the wind, that distinctive rasp like gravel down a metal chute. 6 men with him, maybe more. Hard to tell with the way sound moved strange through snow-laden valleys and ice-crusted ridges. They'd been tracking her for 72 hours now. Getting closer each time she stopped to rest to catch her breath, to press her hands against tree bark and beg her body for just a few more miles. Eva's knowledge of these mountains kept her ahead. She'd been born in these hollows, raised on trails most outsiders never found. Her grandmother had been a root woman, a healer, who'd taught Eva which plants stopped with bleeding and which brought on labor, and which could make a man sleep so deep he'd wake up thinking he'd died and come back. That knowledge had made Eva the settlement's midwife by the time she was 19. She'd brought 47 babies into the world before carrying her own. And she'd be damned if these 5 would be the first she failed to deliver. A branch cracked somewhere behind her. Close. Too close. Eva pressed herself against the trunk of a massive hemlock, its bark rough against her cheek, and forced her breathing to slow. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Small clouds of vapor that dissipated quick in the frozen air. She counted to 30, listening past her own heartbeat for the sounds of pursuit. Footsteps. Multiple sets. The crunch of boots breaking through ice crust over old snow. They were within a quarter mile. She pushed off the tree and kept moving, angling northeast toward the ridge line she'd been navigating toward since yesterday. Her legs burned. Every muscle screamed. Inside her, the baby shifted restlessly, sensing her fear through some bond that went deeper than flesh. "Not yet," she whispered to herself. "Just hold on a little longer. We're almost there." Almost where she wasn't entirely sure, but she knew the ridge marked the boundary. Beyond it lay Northern Crown territory, land controlled by Nathaniel Blackwood and his clan. Eva had never met Lord Blackwood, had only heard the stories that filtered down from the northern settlements. A hard man, they said, fair but ruthless. He'd turned his family's failing coal operation into the most profitable bootlegging network in 3 counties when Prohibition hit. The feds couldn't touch him because his territory was too remote, too defended, and too loyal. His law was simple: respect the borders, respect the clan, or face consequences. Trespassers were dealt with permanently. Ava knew this, knew that crossing into Northern Crown land without invitation was tantamount to suicide, but trespass meant a quick death. The hunting party behind her promised something slower. They wanted to make an example. Wanted to cut the cursed babies from her body and burn them before her eyes so she could see what happened to women who defied the natural order. Silas had told her this himself, shouting it across the frozen creek bed yesterday when they'd nearly caught her at the water's edge. She'd choose Blackwood's bullet over Grendel's knife. The ridgeline appeared through the trees like a dark spine against the gray sky. Eva climbed using roots and saplings to haul herself up the steep grade, her pregnant belly throwing off her balance with every step. Numbness had claimed her hands inside William's old work gloves. Her feet had gone silent an hour ago, which she knew meant frostbite but couldn't afford to think about. At the crest, she stopped. The view opened before her, a vast expanse of mountain wilderness rolling away in all directions like a frozen sea. And there, perhaps 50 yards down the northern slope, she saw them. The boundary stones, ancient cairns of stacked rock, each one taller than a man, arranged in a line that followed the ridge as far as she could see in both directions. Someone had carved symbols into the stones. Clan marks, the Blackwood raven wings spread beak open in eternal challenge. Eva had crossed 100 borders in her life, moving between settlements and hollows as her midwife work demanded. But she'd never crossed one that felt like this. The air itself seemed different here, heavier, charged with warning. She heard voices behind her, the hunting party cresting the southern approach. No more time. Eva half slid, half fell down the northern slope, her pack bouncing against her spine, one hand clutching her belly, while the other grabbed at passing branches to control her descent. She hit the flat ground between 2 cairns hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. Pain exploded through her abdomen. Sharp, wrong, a contraction. No, not now, not here. Eva dragged herself to the nearest boundary stone and pressed her back against it, arms wrapping around her belly as the contraction built and peaked and slowly agonizingly released. She tasted blood, had bitten her lip hard enough to break skin. When she could breathe again, she looked up. Silas Grendel stood 30 yards away on the southern side of the boundary, 6 men fanned out behind him. They'd stopped at the ridgeline like they'd hit an invisible wall, all of them staring at her across the space that separated Hollow Creek territory from Northern Crown. Grendel was a big man, gone soft around the middle, but his arms were still thick as fence posts, and his face carried the map of every fight he'd won. He wore a bearskin coat that made him look even larger. In his right hand, a rifle hung loose and ready. "Evangeline Thorne," he called out, his voice carrying easy across the cold air. "You know you can't stay there. That's Blackwood land. He'll kill you, soon as look at you." Eva said nothing, focused on breathing, on keeping the babies calm. "Come back over the line," Grendel continued. "We'll make it quick, merciful. You won't feel nothing after the first cut." One of the men behind him laughed. The sound was sharp and cruel. Eva's hand found the knife in her pack. William's hunting blade, the one with the bone handle he'd carved himself during long winter nights. She pulled it free, held it where they could see. "I'm not coming by, Silas. Then you'll die on foreign ground carrying devil's spawn." "That what you want?" Before Eva could answer her, she heard something else. A sound that made even Grendel turn his head. Horses. They came from the northwest, moving fast through the trees. Eva counted 6 riders, maybe more. They wore heavy coats and wide-brimmed hats pulled low, and they rode with the confidence of men who knew every inch of this territory. The lead rider was taller than the others, his mount a massive black gelding that snorted steam into the frozen air. He reined up 20 feet from where Eva sat against the boundary stone, the other riders forming a loose semicircle behind him. The man dismounted in one fluid motion. He was lean and broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-40s, with dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. His face was weathered in the way of men who'd spent their lives outdoors. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, pale against tanned skin. He looked at Eva, then at Grendel and his hunting party, then back at Eva. "You're bleeding," he said. His voice was quiet, measured, the kind of quiet that meant he didn't need to raise it to be heard. Eva glanced down. Blood had soaked through her skirt, dark against the gray wool. The contraction had done damage. I'm aware, she managed. The man's eyes dropped to her belly, stayed there for a long moment, then lifted back to her face. How many? Eva's throat went dry. This was it. The moment where even this stranger, this lord of a territory she'd violated, would turn away in disgust or fear. Where he'd hand her back to Grendel, rather than deal with the cursed woman and her impossible pregnancy. But she'd come too far to lie now. 5. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. The riders behind the tall man shifted. She heard leather creak, heard someone mutter something that might have been a prayer or a curse. The tall man's expression didn't change. He just kept looking at her with those steady gray eyes that gave away nothing. Then he turned to face Grendel across the boundary line. Silas Grendel, he said, still doing Hollow Creek's dirty work, I see. Lord Blackwood. Grendel's voice had lost some of its confidence. This is settlement business. Woman violated natural law. We're just bringing her back for justice. Justice, Nathaniel Blackwood let the word hang in the air. That what you're calling it now. She's carrying an abomination. 5 where there should be 1. You know what that means. You know the stories. I know a lot of stories, Blackwood said. Most of them are bullshit told by old men afraid of anything they can't understand. He turned back to Eva, and before she could process what was happening, he knelt in the snow beside her. Up close, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the gray scattered through his stubble, the way his hands were scarred from years of hard work. I'm going to check, he said quietly. Need to know if what you're saying is true. That acceptable to you? Eva nodded, unable to speak. Blackwood placed one hand near her belly, not touching, just hovering there. His eyes closed. For 30 seconds, maybe more, he stayed perfectly still. The only sound was wind through the pines and the nervous shifting of horses. When his eyes opened, something had changed in them. Not fear, not disgust, wonder. I hear them, he said, so quiet only Eva could hear. 5 strong lives fighting to be born. He stood turned back to Grendel and the hunting party. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You have 30 seconds to leave my territory. She's on your land, Lord Blackwood. We're still in Hollow Creek bounds. 25 seconds. You don't understand what she's carrying. 20 seconds. Blackwood's hand dropped to his hip where a revolver hung in a worn leather holster. Behind him, his riders reached for their own weapons with practiced ease. Grendel's face flushed red. This isn't over. Yes, Blackwood said softly, dangerously. It is. 15 seconds. The hunting party retreated, not running but not dawdling either. They backed up the ridge line, keeping their eyes on Blackwood and his men until the trees swallowed them whole. Silence settled over the boundary line. Eva tried to stand, made it halfway before her legs gave out. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Blackwood lifted her like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest with unexpected gentleness. His body was furnace hot against her frozen skin. She could feel his heartbeat through the layers of coat and shirt. Steady, powerful, alive. Stay with me, he commanded. Not a request, an order. Eva's eyes fluttered. The world tilted and swam. She felt herself being lifted onto a horse. Felt Blackwood mount behind her, one arm locked around her waist to keep her steady. The babies, she whispered. I know, we're going to the lodge. Medical supplies. Heat. You'll be safe there. Safe. The word felt foreign. She'd forgotten what it meant. Why, the question came out barely audible. Why help me? Blackwood was quiet for a moment. Then as he turned the horse north toward unseen destinations, he answered. Your husband was William Thorne. It wasn't a question. Eva's vision sharpened despite the pain and cold. You knew him. He worked my mines before the collapse. Good man, honest. The kind who'd tell you when the tunnel wasn't safe, even if it meant losing a day's pay. Blackwood's voice carried something that might have been regret. I told him not to take that job at Black Mountain. Told him Whitmore's operation was a death trap. But a man's got to feed his family. Eva's hand found the wedding ring still on her finger. Simple gold worn thin from years of wear. William died trying to save others, Blackwood continued. Sent 12 miners out of that tunnel before it came down. Only reason Moore didn't die was because he stayed behind to make sure everyone cleared. Tears froze on Eva's cheeks before they could fall. I don't let good men's widows die on my doorstep, Blackwood said. And I sure as hell don't let them die because some superstitious fools think 5 babies means the devil's involved. The lodge appeared through the trees just ahead. Massive, built from whole logs the size of ship masts. Smoke rose from 3 separate chimneys. Light glowed in windows that looked warm and welcoming and impossibly far away. Eva's vision tunneled. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the sensation of being carried up wooden steps, of being laid on something soft, of a woman's voice saying words she couldn't quite make out, and beneath it all the impossible five still beating. When Eva woke, she was staring at a ceiling carved with intricate patterns, moons in various phases, ravens in flight, trees with roots that went deeper than the wood itself. She lay in a bed larger than her entire cabin back in Hollow Creek. Quilts covered her heavy and warm. The air smelled of wood smoke and something medicinal. Herbs she recognized, yarrow and golden seal and shepherd's purse. Her hand went immediately to her belly, still swollen, still moving with small restless shifts. Still alive. A throat cleared. Eva turned her head. An elderly woman sat in a rocking chair beside the bed, knitting needles clicking in weathered hands. She wore a simple dress and a shawl, her white hair pulled back in a bun that had probably been styled the same way for 50 years. Her eyes, when they met Eva's, were sharp and assessing. "About time," the woman said. "Been 3 hours. Thought you might sleep straight through to spring." Eva's voice came out as a rasp. "Where am I?" "Lord Blackwood's lodge, East Wing, second floor, blue room. You've been bleeding on my good sheets, but I suppose that can't be helped." "The babies." "All 5 heartbeats steady. I checked twice." The woman set down her knitting. "I'm Oakes, Granny Oakes if you want to be formal about it. Been the lodge midwife for 40 years, delivered Lord Blackwood himself back when his father ran this territory." Eva tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her abdomen sharp enough to steal her breath. "Don't," Granny Oakes said sharply. "You tore something internal. You need to stay flat for at least a week, maybe more." "I don't have a week. Grendel and his men are on the other side of the boundary line, and that's where they'll stay unless they want to meet their maker ahead of schedule. Lord Blackwood's word is law here. No one crosses it twice." Eva forced herself to breathe through the pain. "He said I'd be safe here." "You are, for now." Granny Oakes picked up her knitting again, needles resuming their rhythmic clicking. "But the lodge itself, that's another problem." "What do you mean?" The old woman was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of knowledge earned through hard experience. "This lodge was built in 1820. My grandmother helped raise these walls. She also helped bury 3 women who tried to carry babies to term while living here. All 3 lost their children in the 7th month. All 3 died within days of the loss. Cold that had nothing to do with winter settled into Eva's bones. The land," Granny Oakes continued, "it was sacred ground once, Shawnee before the settlers came. There's something about the way the lodge sits, the way the foundation stones were laid. It doesn't take kindly to certain things, certain bloodlines, certain pregnancies. You think my babies are cursed. I think your babies are a medical miracle or a statistical impossibility, depending on whether you trust science or God. But I also think this lodge has a history, and history has a way of repeating." Eva's hand tightened on her belly. "How long?" "Before the bleeding gets worse. 3 days, maybe 4. Then your body will start shutting down, trying to save itself by sacrificing the pregnancies. You'll lose them one by one. Then you'll follow." The knitting needles clicked. Steady, relentless. "There has to be something," Eva said. "Some way to leave, that's the only way. Get beyond the lodge's influence. But you're too weak to travel. You'd bleed out before you made it a mile." Granny Oakes looked up from her work. "So unless you've got a miracle in your back pocket, I'd suggest making peace with what's coming." The door opened. Nathaniel Blackwood entered, had to duck his head to clear the frame. He'd changed clothes, traded his outdoor gear for simple trousers and a shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. "How is she?" he asked Granny Oakes. "Stable, for now." Blackwood's eyes moved to Eva. "You heard about the lodge trying to kill me?" "Yes." "It's not malicious. It just is. The foundation, the way it's built. Something about it affects certain pregnancies." He moved closer to the bed. "We've had other women live here over the years. Most do fine. But the ones carrying multiples, or those with complicated bloodlines, they struggle. So I'm supposed to just accept dying here?" "No," the word came out hard, final. "I'm supposed to figure out a solution." "There isn't one," Granny Oakes said. "I've been studying this problem for 40 years. You can't fight the land." Blackwood turned to look at the old woman. "Maybe not, but you can change how you interact with it." He crossed to a desk in the corner, pulled out rolled papers. Construction plans. He spread them across a side table, beckoning Eva to look. The original lodge plans, he said, from 1820. My great-grandfather commissioned them. He was particular about how things were built. Specific angles, specific materials. Some of it was practical. Some of it was well less practical. Eva leaned as far as she could without triggering another wave of pain. The plan showed the lodge's foundation in intricate detail, stone by stone, beam by beam. I don't understand, she said. Blackwood pointed to a section of the eastern foundation. These stones here, they were sourced from a quarry 3 counties south, high iron content. My great-grandfather thought it would provide better support, but iron and certain mineral deposits in the groundwater create electromagnetic fields, subtle ones, not enough to affect most people. But pregnant women, their bodies are already under stress. The field amplifies certain responses. He looked at Eva. It's not magic, it's geology. Understanding dawned slowly. You're saying the lodge isn't cursed, it's just badly designed. I'm saying it was designed without understanding the consequences, which amounts to the same thing for anyone who has to live with those consequences. Blackwood rolled the plans back up. But if the problem is physical, then the solution can be physical too. Granny Oaks had stopped knitting. You're not suggesting what I think you're suggesting. I am. This lodge has stood for 114 years. And in those 114 years, it's killed 3 women and God knows how many unborn children. I'd say that's long enough. Blackwood moved toward the door. I'm calling the council. We have 3 days to fix a century-old mistake. I suggest we get started. He left. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, then faded into silence. Granny Oaks looked at Eva with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. Hard to tell which. You've got yourself a protector, the old woman said. Question is whether that's enough. Eva closed her eyes, felt the quintuple rhythm beneath her ribs, felt William's ring cold against her finger, felt the weight of every impossible thing she'd survived in the last 3 days pressing down like stones. It'll have to be, she whispered. Outside, the mountain wind howled against windows that had witnessed more than a century of storms. Inside, 5 small lives kept fighting, refusing to quit, refusing to accept that the world wanted them dead. And somewhere in the depths of the lodge, Nathaniel Blackwood was gathering men to tear down walls that had stood since before his father was born. All for a woman he'd met 3 hours ago. All for 5 lives that shouldn't exist. The revolution had begun. The council chamber occupied the lodge's north wing, a room built to intimidate. High ceilings supported by massive timber beams, each one carved with the names of clan lords going back 6 generations. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall large enough to roast a whole hog. The heads of mountain cats and black bears stared down from their mounts with glassy eyes that had witnessed decades of decisions. 12 men sat around a table hewn from a single oak felled in 1825. Elders mostly, gray-haired and granite-faced, wearing the kind of authority that came from surviving wars and winters and watching weaker men fall. Nathaniel Blackwood stood at the head of the table, the construction plan spread before him like a battle map. He'd changed again, this time into formal wear. Dark suit, crisp shirt, the gold watch chain his father had worn at every council meeting since 1902. The uniform of leadership. Eva sat in a wooden chair someone had brought for her, positioned near the fireplace where the heat could reach her. Granny Oaks had protested her leaving bed, but Eva had insisted. This was her fight. Her children. She'd be damned if she'd let men decide their fate while she lay helpless 1 floor above. The walk from the blue room to the council chamber had nearly killed her. 73 steps. She'd counted every one as Blackwood, and 2 of his men had supported her weight. Blood had soaked through the fresh bandages Granny Oaks had applied. But Eva had made it. Had lowered herself into the chair with the last of her strength, and now sat perfectly still, hands folded over her swollen belly, face composed despite the pain screaming through her body. The council members stared at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Silas Torrance spoke first, the oldest of them pushing 80 with a beard that hung to his chest like Spanish moss. He'd served on this council since before the Great War had helped Nathaniel's father navigate Prohibition's early years. Lord Blackwood, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, you called emergency session. We came, but I'm having trouble understanding why we're discussing lodge renovation when there's a woman bleeding on our floor. The 2 issues are connected, Blackwood replied. He placed one hand on the construction plans. As you all know, this lodge has a history. 3 women have died here carrying pregnancies to term. Multiple others have lost children in the 7th or 8th month. Heads nodded around the table. Old knowledge passed down like the clan stories. We've always attributed this to curse, Blackwood continued. Bad luck. The land rejecting certain bloodlines. But I had our mining engineer look at the foundation plans last night. He gestured to a younger man standing near the wall. Thomas Waverly, barely 30, who'd learned structural engineering at a college down in Charleston before returning to work the family mines. Waverly stepped forward, clearly nervous to be addressing the council. Sirs, if I may, the Eastern Foundation, specifically the section beneath the residential wings, was built using stones from the Clearwater quarry. High iron content. When you combine that with the underground springs we know run beneath this property, you create what's essentially a natural electromagnetic field. Blank stares around the table. In simple terms, Waverly continued, the rocks and water are creating something that affects human biology. Pregnant women are particularly susceptible. The field disrupts certain processes, causes stress on the body. Over time, that stress becomes fatal to both mother and unborn children. Silence. Then Marcus Fentworth leaned forward, a broad man in his 50s who owned timber operations throughout the territory. You're telling me this lodge is killing women because of rocks, Ibrahim? I'm telling you the foundation is flawed. It was built without understanding the consequences. And your solution, this from Abraham Coulter, rail-thin and sharp-eyed, who controlled most of the territory's moonshine distribution. Blackwood took over. We removed the affected stone, divert the underground spring, rebuild the eastern foundation using limestone from the northern quarry. Thomas estimates we can do it in 72 hours if we commit full resources. The room exploded. 72 hours to tear apart a 100-year-old structure. The cost alone would be, this is madness for one woman, and 5 unborn children who have done nothing to deserve death. Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The room went silent. He looked at each council member in turn. William Thorne worked our mines. Good man, honest worker. He died at Black Mountain because Senator Whitmore cut corners to save money. Those corners killed 43 men, 43 fathers, brothers, sons. William's widow stands before you carrying his last legacy. 5 children conceived before his death. And you're telling me we should let them die because renovation is inconvenient. It's not about convenience, Torrance said quietly. It's about precedent. We start tearing down ancestral structures for outsiders. Where does it stop? What happens to clan law? What happens to the boundaries we've maintained for generations? Clan law exists to protect our people, Blackwood said, not to murder innocents. She's not our people. This from Jacob Renfield, younger than most of the council, early 40s, with the kind of face that had never known real hardship. His family controlled most of the territory's trade routes. She's Hollow Creek. They exiled her. That makes her their problem, not ours. Eva had been silent until now, but something in Renfield's tone, the casual dismissal of her children's lives, made her speak. May I address the council? Her voice came out steady despite the pain. Blackwood nodded. Eva rose. The movement cost her, sent fresh blood trickling down her thighs, but she stood, straight-backed, meeting their eyes one by one. You're right, she said. I'm not your people. I'm an outsider who violated your borders. By your law, Lord Blackwood could have shot me on sight. Instead, he showed mercy, showed humanity, qualities I thought this council valued. She took a breath, felt one of the babies kick hard against her ribs. But this isn't just about me, it's about what this lodge represents. You've lost women here, your own daughters, granddaughters, nieces. How many more will die before someone has the courage to fix what's broken? The lodge isn't broken, Renfield snapped. It stood for over a century. Standing isn't the same as serving. Eva's hands tightened on her belly. I've delivered 47 babies in my life. I've held women's hands while they labored. I've caught newborns and cut cords and cleaned blood off floors. And I've watched 3 women die because their bodies couldn't handle the strain. Each time I thought I'd done something wrong, failed them somehow. She looked directly at Torrance. Your granddaughter, Rebecca. She died here in 1929 carrying twins. I read about it in the settlement records. She was 23 years old. Torrance's face went pale. And your daughter, Eva turned to Coulter. Martha lost triplets in the 6th month, 1931. She survived, but barely. Coulter's jaw worked. He said nothing. This lodge has been killing your own people for generations, Eva said. You just didn't know why. Now you do. Now you have a chance to stop it. The question is whether you have the will. The silence that followed was different, heavier, weighted with memories of women lost children, never-born futures cut short by something they'd attributed to fate or gone or bad luck. Finally, Torrance spoke. How certain are you, he addressed the question to Waverly, about the electromagnetic field? The science. 90%, the engineer replied. I've seen similar effects in the deep mines. Certain mineral combinations create fields that affect equipment, interfere with compass readings. Human biology is more complex, but the principle is the same. And if we do nothing? Coulter asked. Granny Oaks answered from her position near Eva's chair. The woman will start hemorrhaging within 3 days. Her body will try to save itself by rejecting the pregnancies. One by one, the babies will die. Then she'll follow. I've seen it before. It's not pretty. But if she leaves the lodge, she's too weak, Granny Oaks said flatly. She'd bleed out within a mile, maybe less. Black would let them sit with that knowledge. Let them imagine Eva's death on their hands. The 5 children who would never draw breath. The precedent it would set. The kind of men they would become if they chose convenience over conscience. Marcus Fentworth broke first. I'm in. My timber crews can handle the demolition and reconstruction. We've got the men and equipment. I can divert water, Coulter added slowly. Done it before for the stills. Underground springs, you need to redirect them carefully, but it's possible. One by one, the council members voiced support. Some reluctant, some genuine, but support nonetheless. Only Jacob Renfield remained opposed. This is a mistake, he said. We're setting a precedent that will haunt us. Every outsider with a problem will come begging for salvation. We'll become a charity house instead of a sovereign territory. Noted, Blackwood said. Your objection is recorded, but the majority has spoken. We proceed. Renfield stood abruptly, his chair scraping against stone. Then I want it known that I oppose this madness. When it falls apart, when the costs spiral and the consequences mount, remember who tried to stop it. He left. The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the mounted trophy heads. The remaining council members exchanged glances. Renfield's family controlled crucial supply lines. His opposition could complicate things, but Blackwood seemed unconcerned. Thomas, you have operational command. Whatever you need, whoever you need, you have full authority to requisition. I want foundation plans revised by dawn. Demolition starts at first light. Yes, sir. Marcus, coordinate with Thomas on structural support. We can't have the eastern wing collapsing while we're pulling stones. I want it done right. Understood. Abraham, the water diversion is critical. If those springs keep flowing through the foundation, we've accomplished nothing. Coulter nodded. I'll need 12 hours to map the underground flow, then another 12 to dig diversion channels. Weather's cold enough that the ground is frozen solid 4 feet down. We'll need to burn brush to thaw it before we can dig. Do it, the council continued planning. Eva listened as they transformed emergency into action. These were men who'd built empires out of coal and timber and illegal whiskey. They knew how to move fast when necessary, knew how to turn resources into results. But beneath the efficiency, she heard the undercurrent, the doubt, the fear that this wouldn't work, that 72 hours wasn't enough time, that the lodge's foundations went deeper than stone and water. Granny Oaks touched her elbow. You need to lie down. You're bleeding through the chair. Eva looked down. The old woman was right. Dark stains had soaked through her skirt, were starting to pool on the wooden seat. Not yet, Eva whispered. I need to see the foundation. You need to see a bed before you pass out. I need to understand what they're fixing. If I'm going to trust my children's lives to this plan, I need to see it myself. Blackwood overheard. She's right. Thomas, take us to the Eastern Foundation. All of us. We should see what we're dealing with. The foundation was accessible through a stone stairway that descended from the main floor into darkness. Thomas Waverly led the way with a lantern, followed by Blackwood, supporting Eva, then the remaining council members filing down like mourners into a crypt. The air grew colder as they descended, damper. Eva could smell standing water and old stone and something else, something that made her skin prickle with instinctive warning. The foundation room was larger than she'd expected. A cavern of stacked stone and timber supports stretching away into shadows the lantern couldn't quite reach. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, steady, rhythmic, like a clock counting down. Thomas raised the lantern to illuminate the eastern wall. There, you see those stones darker than the others. That's the Clearwater quarry iron content. And here, he pointed to where water seeped between stones, the underground spring. It flows directly beneath the residential wing above us. Eva moved closer. Blackwood stayed at her elbow, ready to catch her if she fell. She placed one hand against the dark stones. The sensation was immediate. A thrumming that traveled up her arms, settled in her chest, made the baby shift restlessly. Not painful exactly, but wrong, like touching something that didn't want to be touched. "You feel it?" Thomas asked. "Yes." Ava pulled her hand back. The sensation faded but didn't disappear entirely. "It's subtle, but it's there." Now imagine living with that for 7 months, your body constantly fighting against it, the stress building day by day. Thomas touched the stones himself. It wouldn't kill a healthy person quickly, but pregnancy already puts massive strain on the body. This just tips the balance. Ava studied the wall, counted stones, estimated depth and weight. Her mind, trained by years of solving medical problems with limited resources, began calculating. How many stones need to be removed? 46 from this wall alone. Then we need to excavate down another 6 feet to redirect the spring. After that, we rebuild using limestone. Different mineral content shouldn't create the same field effect. 46 stones in 72 hours. We'll have 30 men working in shifts. It's possible. Tight, but possible. Eva turned to look at the supports holding up the floor above. Massive timber beams, each one probably weighing more than a horse. And the eastern wing won't collapse. Not if we shore it up properly. We'll install temporary supports before we remove the first stone. Once the new foundation is in place, we'll transfer the load back. The building will never know the difference. "Won't accept it will," Fentworth said from behind them. "Buildings remember. Wood settles, stone shifts. You can't tear out a foundation and expect everything to go back exactly as it was." "Maybe that's good," Blackwood said quietly. "Maybe some things shouldn't go back to how they were." They stood in silence, staring at the wall that had killed 3 women and was working on a 4th. Ava felt one of the babies kick. A strong, determined movement, fighting to live despite the invisible force trying to end them. "When do you start?" she asked. "Dawn," Thomas said. "We'll work through the night preparing. Gathering materials, setting up the temporary supports and mapping the water flow. First stone comes out at sunrise." Eva nodded, felt fresh blood trickling down her thighs. Her vision swam slightly, but she forced herself to stay focused. "I want to be here. Want to see it." "You'll be in bed," Granny Oaks had said firmly. "Watching men pull rocks while you bleed to death isn't helpful to anyone." "Then I'll watch from bed. Set up a chair where I can see the work. I need to know it's happening. Need to see progress." Blackwood studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll arrange it. You can watch from the ground floor window. It overlooks the work site." They climbed back to the main floor. Each step cost Eva more than the last. By the time they reached the top, she was leaning heavily on Blackwood, her breathing shallow and pained. Granny Oaks and 2 other women Eva hadn't met before helped her to a room on the ground floor, smaller than the blue room upstairs, but with a large window that faced east. Someone had already brought a bed down, made it up with clean linens. A chair sat near the window. They got Eva settled, changed her blood-soaked clothes, applied fresh bandages that would be red within the hour. Granny Oaks mixed something in a tin cup, herbs that smelled bitter and medicinal. "Drink," the old woman commanded. Eva obeyed. The liquid burned going down, left a taste like copper and earth. "What is it?" "Shepherd's purse and red raspberry leaf. Helps slow bleeding. Won't stop it entirely, but might buy you some time." Granny Oaks set the cup aside. "You should sleep while you can. Tomorrow's going to be loud." But Eva couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, feeling her children move inside her, listening to the sounds of preparation outside. Men shouting orders, wagon wheels creaking as equipment arrived, hammers striking metal, the mountain coming alive with purpose. Somewhere past midnight, Blackwood appeared in her doorway. "You should be resting," he said. "So should you." He moved into the room, pulled the chair from the window, positioned it beside her bed, sat down with the heaviness of a man who'd carried too much weight for too long. "I wanted to explain," he said, "why I'm doing this, in case you're wondering if it's pity or charity or some kind of savior complex. I assumed it was because you knew William. That's part of it, but there's more." Blackwood leaned back, his face half-shadowed in the dim light. "My mother died in this lodge. I was 7. She was pregnant with what would have been my baby sister. 8th month. Started bleeding one morning. By evening she was gone. My father blamed bad luck. The doctor blamed complications. No one talked about the 3 other women who died the same way." His hands tightened on the chair arms. "I grew up in this building. Learned to shoot in the yard outside. Learned clan law in the council chamber. Took over leadership when my father died in 1928. And the whole time I knew something was wrong, knew this place had a taste for pregnant women. But I didn't do anything about it. Told myself it was superstition, old mountain fears. He looked at Eva. Then you showed up, carrying 5 lives that shouldn't exist, being hunted because people fear what they don't understand. And I realized I had a choice. Do what I've always done, accept the way things are. Let tradition and fear dictate what's possible, or actually fix the problem. You're rebuilding your lodge because of your mother. I'm rebuilding it because she deserved better. Because those 3 women deserve better. Because your children deserve a chance. He stood. Get some rest. Dawn comes early. He left before Eva could respond. She lay in the darkness, one hand on her belly, feeling the 5 small lives that refused to quit. Outside, men continued working through the night, building scaffolding, setting supports, preparing to tear down walls that had stood since before the Civil War, all for 5 children who might not survive to see them finished. Eva closed her eyes, thought of William, imagined his hands on hers, his voice telling her everything would be fine. He'd always been the optimist, the one who believed hard work and honest effort could overcome any obstacle. She'd thought him naive. Now lying in a stranger's lodge, while that stranger prepared to dismantle his own history to save her children, she wondered if maybe William had been right all along. Maybe faith and stubbornness were enough. Maybe refusing to accept defeat was its own kind of magic. Outside, the first hammer fell. The sound rang through the cold night air like a bell. The reconstruction had begun. Dawn broke cold and clear over the mountains. The kind of January morning where breath froze in the air and every surface sparkled with frost that looked like ground diamonds. Eva watched it arrive from her ground floor window, propped against pillows that Granny Oaks had arranged with military precision. The bleeding had slowed overnight, not stopped, but reduced to a trickle that soaked through bandages every few hours instead of every few minutes. Small victories. Eva had learned to measure life in small victories. Outside the worksite hummed with controlled chaos. 30 men may be more moved with the choreographed efficiency of those who'd spent their lives building and destroying in equal measure. They wore heavy canvas coats against the cold leather gloves scarred from years of hard-use wool caps pulled low over ears. Most were older. 40, 50 men who remembered when physical labor was the only kind that mattered. Thomas Waverly stood at the center of it all, consulting plans spread across a makeshift table constructed from sawhorses and planks. He'd point, men would nod, tools would appear, and within minutes, another section of scaffolding would rise, or another support beam would slot into place. Eva had spent her entire adult life bringing order out of chaos, turning the bloody, screaming mess of childbirth into the quiet miracle of a newborn's first breath. She recognized the same process here, the same attention to detail, the same understanding that every step mattered, that shortcuts killed. Granny Oaks entered carrying a tray, more of that bitter tea, thin gruel that Eva's stomach barely tolerated, a slice of bread with honey. "You need to eat," the old woman said. Not a suggestion. Eva forced down the gruel. Each spoonful was an act of will. Her body wanted to reject everything, wanted to curl inward and surrender. But the babies needed fuel, needed her to keep fighting. "How bad is it?" Eva asked between bites. "Tell me the truth." Granny Oaks settled into the chair by the window, her knitting needles appearing from somewhere in her shawl. The rhythmic clicking started immediately, a sound Eva had come to associate with the old woman's presence. "Bad enough, you've lost more blood than most women lose during actual childbirth. Your body's trying to protect itself by shutting down non-essential systems. Problem is, pregnancy isn't non-essential, so you're fighting yourself. How long? Until you collapse, 2 days, maybe 3. The babies have maybe 4 days before the stress becomes too much." The needles kept clicking. Thomas and his crew are moving fast, but fast might not be fast enough. Eva turned back to the window, watched as 4 men positioned themselves around one of the dark foundation stones. They'd exposed it by removing several feet of earth, creating a pit that revealed the eastern wall in cross-section. The stone in question was massive, probably weighed 500 pounds, maybe more. Thomas called out orders. The men wrapped chains around the stone, threaded them through a pulley system attached to a tripod of timber poles. A horse was led forward, hitched to the chains. "Pull!" Thomas shouted. The horse leaned into the harness. Chains went taut. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound that Eva could hear even through the closed window, the stone shifted. Inch by inch, it emerged from the wall. Men guided it with long poles, keeping it steady as the horse dragged it free. When it finally came loose, they lowered it to the ground with the same careful precision. One down, 45 to go. The process took 40 minutes from start to finish. Eva did the math. At that rate, they'd need over 30 hours just for stone removal. Add in the water diversion, the new stones, the reconstruction. 72 hours suddenly seemed wildly optimistic. But the men kept working. They pulled the second stone faster. 35 minutes. Learned from the first attempt, adjusted their technique. By the third stone, they were down to 28 minutes. Eva watched the pile of dark stones grow beside the pit. Each one represented a piece of the problem, a fragment of the force that had been killing her children by degrees. Around mid-morning, Nathaniel Blackwood appeared in her doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept. Dirt streaked his face. His shirt was soaked with sweat, despite the freezing temperature. "Need to check something," he said. "Won't take long." Eva nodded. Blackwood entered and knelt beside her bed. He placed one hand near her belly, not touching, maintaining that respectful distance. His eyes closed. The room went silent except for Granny Oakes's knitting needles. After a long moment, Blackwood's eyes opened. Something in his expression had softened. "All five," he said quietly. "Still fighting." "How can you sense them?" "Not sure exactly. My mother had the same gift. She could tell when women were pregnant before they knew themselves. Could sense twins could feel when something was wrong." He stood. "Maybe it runs in the blood. Maybe it's just paying attention to things most people ignore. It's a rare gift. So is carrying 5 children and refusing to give up." He moved toward the door. "We're making good progress. 12 stones out so far." Abraham's crew started on the water diversion. They're burning brush to thaw the ground. "It's not going to be enough time, is it?" Blackwood was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of honest assessment. "I don't know. We're moving as fast as we can without compromising the work. But you're right that it's tight, very tight. What happens if we run out of time before you finish? Then we move you, risk the bleeding. Get you far enough from the lodge that the field effect lessens. You'd still be in danger, but maybe the babies would have a chance." "I'd die." "Maybe, maybe not. Granny Oaks is good at stopping bleeding. And we've got a doctor in the settlement 5 miles north. Former Army surgeon. He's seen worse." Eva looked at the 5 small bumps moving beneath her nightgown. 5 distinct shapes, each one fighting for space. "If it comes to that, save them. Not me." "It won't come to that. But if it does—" "I heard you." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "But I'm not planning on losing anyone. Not you, not them. We're going to finish this work, and you're going to deliver 5 healthy babies in a lodge that won't try to kill them." "That's the plan." He left before Eva could argue. The day dragged on. Eva slept fitfully, waking every hour or so to check the progress outside. By noon, 20 stones had been removed. By evening, 32. The pile beside the pit had grown into a small mountain of dark rock. Men worked in shifts. When one crew exhausted themselves, another took over. They brought in more horses to speed the pulling. Rigged additional pulley systems so multiple stones could be worked simultaneously. Thomas Waverly seemed to be everywhere at once, checking measurements, adjusting techniques, solving problems before they became disasters. Eva watched him work and understood why Blackwood had put him in charge. The young engineer had the kind of mind that saw 3 steps ahead, that anticipated failure points and reinforced them before they failed. Around sunset, Abraham Coulter's crew made their breakthrough on the water diversion. Eva heard the shout first, then saw men scrambling out of a trench they dug parallel to the lodge foundation. Water began flowing into the new channel, dark and mineral-rich, diverted away from its century-old path beneath the building. Thomas rushed over with his charts, consulted with Abraham. Both men nodded. Within minutes, they'd redirected their crews to start removing more foundation stones now that the water was controlled. Progress accelerated. By full dark, 41 stones had been removed. Just 5 more to go, but Eva could feel herself failing. The babies had been restless all day, moving constantly, shifting position, pressing against organs that were already stressed to their limits. The pain had evolved from sharp to a deep grinding ache that never fully subsided. Granny Oakes checked her bandages every hour. The blood loss was increasing again. Not dramatic, but steady. The old woman's face grew more concerned with each check. "You need to prepare yourself," Granny Oakes said during one of the evening changes. "Your body's reaching its limit. Even if they finish the foundation tonight, you might not make it to full term." "How long do I need to make it?" "Full term for quintuplets is 36 weeks. You're at 30 weeks now. Each additional day improves their chances. But realistically, you need at least 4 more weeks, maybe 6. So finish the foundation, then survive for a month. While your body tries to shut down, yes. Ava closed her eyes, felt William's ring on her finger, thought about the journal in her pack that she still hadn't read. His words, his thoughts, his last months documented in ink on paper. Granny, she said quietly, my pack, the one I came with, is it here? In the corner. Why perfect? There's a journal, leather-bound. Can you get it? The old woman retrieved the pack, pulled out the journal, handed it over. The leather was worn smooth from William's hands. His name was stamped on the cover in simple letters. Eva opened it to the first page, William's handwriting. Precise and careful the way he'd done everything in life. September 1933. Started work at Black Mountain today. The operation is bigger than I expected. Whitmore's running 3 separate tunnels, all of them pushing deeper than safety protocols recommend. Mentioned this to the foreman. He told me to keep my head down and my mouth shut if I wanted to keep my job. Eva turned the page. September 15th. Found structural problems in Tunnel C. Support beams are spaced too far apart. The rock overhead is fractured. Brought this to the mine engineer. He said they'd look into it. Nothing has changed. September 22nd. 2 near collapses this week. Men are getting nervous, some talking about quitting, but jobs are scarce. Families need feeding. So we keep going down. October 3rd. I think Whitmore is stealing from the worker pension fund. Found discrepancies in the payroll ledgers, money being transferred to accounts I can't trace. Need to document this carefully. If I'm right, this is criminal. Eva's heart began to pound. She flipped through more pages. Detailed observations, dates times amounts. William had been building a case, collecting evidence. November 8th. The Federal Mining Commission is coming for inspections in December. I'm going to testify. Tell them everything. The safety violations, the pension theft, all of it. Eva doesn't know yet. Don't want to worry her until I'm certain. But I can't stay silent. Good men are going to die if nothing changes. November 29th. Someone knows I'm planning to talk. Found my locker broken into. Documents I'd hidden are gone. Started keeping copies at home. If anything happens to me, Eva needs to know the truth. The journal ended on December 1st, the day before the collapse. Final entry. Tomorrow I testify. I'm scared, but it's the right thing. These men deserve better. Their families deserve better. If I don't come back, if something goes wrong, I need Eva to know I love her, love our child. Everything I'm doing is for them. For a future where workers don't die because bosses cut corners. Eva's hands trembled. She closed the journal, held it against her chest. William hadn't just died in a random accident. He'd been murdered. Silenced before he could expose Whitmore's crimes. And she was carrying the evidence. Granny Oaks had been watching her. What is it? My husband was going to testify against Senator Whitmore about safety violations and theft. He died the day before he could speak. You think Whitmore killed him? I think Whitmore had 43 men killed to protect his secrets. Eva looked at the old woman. And I think he's afraid these babies will expose him. That's why Grendel was so determined. Not because they're cursed, because they're proof William existed, proof someone was willing to stand up. What are you going to do? I'm going to finish what William started. Before Granny Oaks could respond, shouting erupted outside. Eva struggled to the window, saw men running toward the foundation pit, saw Thomas Waverly gesturing frantically, saw Blackwood sprinting across the worksite. Something had gone wrong. Eva pushed herself out of bed despite Granny Oaks's protests, made it to the door, out into the hallway. Every step sent fresh blood soaking through her bandages, but she kept moving. By the time she reached the worksite, a crowd had gathered around the pit. The temporary supports were failing. Eva could see it even from a distance. One of the massive timber beams that held up the eastern wing had cracked. Not broken, but stressed beyond its limits. The building above was settling, shifting, putting more weight on the failing support. If it gave way completely, the entire wing would collapse, crushing anyone in the pit, destroying weeks of work, maybe bringing down the whole lodge. Thomas was already calling orders. Get everyone out of the pit. Now, move the horses back. Clear the area. Men scrambled up rope ladders. The last one cleared just as the beam cracked again. A sound like a rifle shot. The building above them groaned. Blackwood grabbed Thomas. Can we stabilize it? Not from here. We'd need to shore it up from inside the wing. But that means going into the structure while it's failing. How long do we have? Minutes, maybe less. Blackwood didn't hesitate. Show me where. They ran toward the lodge entrance, and Eva followed, ignoring Granny Oaks calling after her. She made it inside just as Blackwood and Thomas were ascending the stairs to the second floor. The eastern wing groaned around them. Eva could feel the building settling, hear timbers protesting stress they were never designed to handle. Thomas led them to a storage room, pulled up floorboards to reveal the support structure beneath. The cracked beam was visible, a massive piece of timber that ran the length of the wing. "We need to install a sister beam," Thomas said. "Run it parallel to the cracked one, transfer the load. But it has to be done perfectly. If we get the angle wrong, the whole thing comes down." "What do you need?" 20-foot timber, exactly 16 inches thick, and 4 men strong enough to lift it into position. Blackwood was already moving, calling names. Within minutes, 4 of his largest workers had arrived carrying a beam that probably weighed 600 pounds. They positioned themselves beneath the storage room, working from the floor below. Thomas directed them with hand signals, making minute adjustments. 6 inches left, he called down. "Now up, slowly, steady." The men strained. The beam rose inch by inch. Eva watched from the doorway, one hand braced against the wall, the other on her belly. She could feel the building's distress like it was her own body failing. Every creak, every groan echoed through her bones. Blood ran down her legs, more than before. The stress was accelerating her body's collapse. "Almost there," Thomas said. "Another foot, hold it steady." The cracked beam groaned, started to give. "Now," Thomas shouted. The men heaved the sister beam into final position. Thomas drove wooden wedges between the 2 timbers, locking them together. The load transferred. The groaning stopped. Silence. Everyone held their breath. The building settled, but it held. Thomas sagged against the wall, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold. That was too close. Blackwood helped him up. "Will it hold long enough to finish?" "If we work fast, if nothing else goes wrong, if we're very, very lucky." Eva's vision swam. She felt her knees give out. Blackwood caught her before she hit the floor. "Get Granny Oaks, now!" The old woman arrived within minutes, took one look at Eva and cursed. "She's hemorrhaging. We need to get her back to bed, apply pressure, stop the bleeding before it's too late." They carried Eva back to the ground floor room, laid her on sheets that turned red within seconds. Granny Oaks worked with practiced efficiency, packing wounds with cloth soaked in yarrow and shepherd's purse, applying pressure to points Eva's medical training recognized, but the blood kept coming. "The stress of moving," Granny Oaks said, "of standing. It's too much. Your body can't handle it." Eva looked at the window, at the worksite where men had returned to pulling stones despite the near disaster, at the pile of dark rocks that represented hope. "How many stones left?" she whispered. 5, Blackwood said from the doorway. "Just 5 more. Then finish. Don't stop. Not for me. Not for anything. Just finish." Granny Oaks met Blackwood's eyes over Eva's body. The look they exchanged said everything. Eva might not survive the night, but outside in the freezing darkness, men kept working, kept pulling stones, kept building toward a future that seemed more impossible with each passing hour. The 42nd stone came free around midnight, the 43rd an hour later, the 44th at 2 in the morning, the 45th at 3. By 4, only 1 remained. Eva drifted in and out of consciousness. When she was aware, she felt the babies moving. Weaker now, their movements less frantic, like they knew their mother was failing and were trying to conserve strength for whatever came next. Granny Oaks had stopped trying to stem the bleeding, just kept Eva comfortable, changed bandages when they soaked through, held her hand during the worst moments. "I'm sorry," the old woman whispered. "I'm so sorry." Through the window, Eva watched men position chains around the final stone, watched the horse lean into the harness, watched the stone resist, then shift, then slowly emerge from the wall that had held it for over a century. When it finally came free, a cheer went up from the workers. 46 stones removed. The foundation was clear. Eva closed her eyes, felt William's ring on her finger, felt the quintuple rhythm beneath her ribs growing fainter. "We did it," she whispered. Then darkness claimed her, and she knew nothing more. Eva woke to silence. Not the absence of sound, but a different quality of quiet. The kind that came after storms, after battles, after the world had exhausted itself and needed to rest. Pale light filtered through the window. Morning, but she couldn't tell which one. How long had she been unconscious? Hours, days. Her hand moved to her belly, still swollen, still moving with small, restless shifts, still alive. "You're awake." Granny Oaks appeared beside the bed, looking older than Eva remembered. Exhaustion had carved new lines around the old woman's eyes. "Wasn't sure you would be." How long? 36 hours. You collapsed the night they pulled the last stone. Bled so much I thought we'd lost you. The old woman's hands were gentle as she checked Eva's pulse, her temperature. But you're stubborn. Like these mountains. Won't quit even when quitting makes sense. Eva tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her abdomen, but it was different now. Sharper, more localized. Not the grinding systemic agony of before. The foundation. Finished. They worked through 2 nights straight. Removed all 46 stones, diverted the spring, rebuilt the entire eastern section with limestone from the northern quarry. Thomas Waverly damn near killed himself, making sure every angle was perfect. Granny Oaks helped prop Eva against pillows. The building settled yesterday afternoon. No cracks, no shifts. It's solid. And the field, the electromagnetic effect, gone. I can feel the difference. The air itself is lighter somehow, like the lodge has been holding its breath for 100 years and finally exhaled. Eva closed her eyes, felt tears burning behind her lids, but refused to let them fall. Then the babies have a chance, a real chance. Granny Oaks pulled the chair closer. But you're not out of danger yet. You lost too much blood. Your body is barely functioning. You need weeks of rest, proper nutrition, no stress. How much time until they're born? Full term for quintuplets would be another 6 weeks. But realistically, you'll go into labor within 2 or 3 weeks. Your body can't sustain this much longer. 6 weeks, maybe 3. Ava did the math. If she could hold on for just 3 more weeks, the babies would have decent survival odds. Not perfect, but decent. She could survive 3 weeks. She had to. The door opened. Nathaniel Blackwood entered, looking like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. Dirt still streaked his face. His clothes were torn and stained, but his eyes were clear. "You're alive," he said, apparently. "We finished the foundation. The lodge is stable. The field effect is gone." He moved to the foot of her bed. "You kept your end of the bargain. Stayed alive long enough for us to fix what was broken. Now it's your turn to rest." "I need to do more than rest." Blackwood frowned. "What do you mean?" Eva gestured to her pack in the corner. "The journal." "William's journal. Read it." He retrieved the leather-bound book, opened it to the first page. Eva watched his expression change as he read. Confusion giving way to understanding, then to cold fury. When he finished, he closed the journal carefully. Whitmore had them killed, all 43 men, to cover up theft and safety violations, and to stop William from testifying to the Federal Mining Commission. You have proof? William documented everything. Dates, amounts, safety violations. He was building a case. This journal is evidence. Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Then we finish what he started. We bring Whitmore to justice. He's a state senator, protected by money and connections. What can we do? We can tell the truth publicly, loudly, in a way he can't silence." Blackwood looked at her. "The Federal Mining Commission is still active, still investigating safety violations across Appalachia. If we present Williams' evidence, if the widows of those 43 men testify, Whitmore won't be able to hide behind his position. It'll take time. Organization. I can't. You can rest and grow stronger. I'll handle the organization." Blackwood moved toward the door. "You've carried this burden long enough. Let someone else share the weight." Over the next 2 weeks, Ava watched from her window as Blackwood transformed grief into action. He sent riders to every settlement within 50 miles. Found the widows and families of the men who died at Black Mountain. Brought them to Northern Crown territory, offered them protection and support. They came slowly at first, suspicious of a clanlord's promises. But when they met Eva, when they heard William's story and saw the journal's evidence, they understood. This wasn't charity, this was war. A quiet war fought with documents and testimony instead of guns. But war nonetheless. Blackwood hired a lawyer from Charleston, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Marsh, who'd made her reputation defending miners against corporate exploitation. She reviewed Williams' journal, interviewed the widows, built a case that even Whitmore's expensive lawyers couldn't dismantle. By the end of the second week, they had testimony from 12 families, financial records proving pension theft, safety reports that Whitmore's engineers had falsified, and Williams' journal tying it all together. The Federal Mining Commission agreed to reopen the investigation. Eva grew stronger. The bleeding stopped entirely. Her body, freed from the lodge's invisible assault, began to heal. She could walk short distances without collapsing, could eat without immediately vomiting, could feel the babies moving with renewed vigor. Granny Oaks checked her daily. 3 more weeks, the old woman said during one examination. Maybe 4 if you're lucky, and these babies are patient. But you're going to make it, you and all 5 of them. On the 18th day after the foundation was completed, Eva felt the first real contraction. Not the stress-induced cramps of before, but something purposeful. Her body preparing for what came next. "It's starting," she told Granny Oaks. "Earlier than I hoped, but not dangerously early." The old woman began gathering supplies. "We'll monitor you. If labor progresses quickly, we deliver here. If it's slow, we might have another week or two." Labor was slow. Contractions came every few hours, then stopped. Started again the next day. Stopped. It was like the babies were testing the waters, making sure the world was safe before committing to entry. Eva used the time to prepare herself mentally. Reviewed everything she knew about multiple births, calculated complications and solutions, made peace with the fact that not all 5 might survive, but she'd give them every chance. On day 23, Blackwood brought news. "The hearing is set," he said. 3 weeks from today, federal courthouse in Charleston. Whitmore will be there, so will his lawyers, and so will we. I can't travel to Charleston. Not this pregnant. You won't have to. Catherine Marsh will present the evidence. The widows will testify. Your job is to deliver 5 healthy babies and let them be living proof that Whitmore failed to silence William's legacy. Eva looked at him. This man who'd torn apart his ancestral home to save her children, who'd organized a legal battle against one of the most powerful politicians in the state, who'd never once asked for anything in return. "Why?" she asked. "Why risk everything for people you barely know?" Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. "My mother died in this lodge because my father was too afraid to question why women kept dying here. He accepted tradition over truth, accepted loss as inevitable." He met her eyes. "I won't be him. Won't let fear or tradition or convenience dictate what's right. Your children deserve to live. William deserved justice. Sometimes it's that simple." On day 27, Eva went into active labor. It started just after dawn, a contraction that didn't stop, that built and peaked and transformed into the inexorable process of birth. Granny Oaks assembled her team, 3 other midwives from surrounding settlements, women who'd delivered hundreds of babies between them. They worked with calm efficiency, turning Eva's ground floor room into a birthing chamber. Blackwood stayed close but outside, pacing the hallway, ready if needed but respecting the women's space. The first baby came at noon, a girl, small but perfectly formed. She emerged screaming, her lungs strong, her color good. Granny Oaks cut the cord, cleaned her, wrapped her in soft cloth. "Abigail," Eva whispered, the name she'd chosen for her firstborn daughter. The second came 20 minutes later. A boy, slightly larger than his sister. He didn't scream, just looked around with wide, curious eyes before settling into sleep. "Nathaniel," Eva said, looking toward the door where Blackwood stood frozen. "If that's acceptable to you." Through the doorway, she saw the clan lord's face crack, saw emotion he rarely showed bleeding through his controlled exterior. "It's acceptable," he said quietly. The third came harder. Another girl breached position, requiring all of Granny Oaks' skill to turn and deliver safely. But she came, small and fierce and already fighting. Constance. The fourth took an hour, a boy who seemed reluctant to leave the only home he'd known. But eventually, inevitably, he emerged, quiet and calm, already at peace with the world. Samuel. By evening, Eva was exhausted. She'd been laboring for 12 hours. 4 babies lay in cradles carved from the lodge's removed foundation timber. Symbolic reclamation of wood that had tried to kill him. One remained. The contractions were weaker now, Eva's body reaching its limits. Granny Oaks checked her pulse, her color, her bleeding. "The last one's in distress," the old woman said quietly. "Heartbeats irregular. If we don't get her out soon, then get her out." But the baby wouldn't come, stuck in a position that made natural birth impossible. Eva pushed until she tasted blood, until her vision grayed, until Granny Oaks said the words every midwife dreaded. "We're going to lose her." "No," Eva's voice came out raw, absolute. "Get Blackwood." The clan lord entered the room without hesitation, knelt beside the bed. "The baby's stuck," Eva gasped between contractions. "Breech and sideways. I can't turn her, can't push her free, but you can sense them, you can feel position." "I'm not a midwife. You're what we have. Please." Blackwood placed both hands on Eva's belly, closed his eyes. For 30 seconds that stretched like hours, he stayed perfectly still. Then his hands moved. Gentle pressure here, slight adjustment there. Following instincts Eva couldn't explain, but trusted completely. Inside her, the baby shifted. There, Blackwood said. She's turned. Try now. Eva pushed, felt the baby move, felt progress for the first time in an hour. One more push, then another. And suddenly, impossibly, the fifth baby slid free, the smallest of them all. A girl who didn't cry, didn't move, didn't breathe. Granny Oaks worked frantically, clearing airways, stimulating breathing. But nothing worked. Blackwood took the baby from her, placed his mouth over the tiny nose and mouth, breathed once, twice, 3 times. The baby gasped, coughed, then screamed with indignant fury at being forced into the cold world. The sound was the most beautiful thing Eva had ever heard. Lily, she whispered, the smallest, the fighter. 5 cradles beneath the window, 5 babies wrapped in cloth, 5 lives that had survived impossible odds. Eva closed her eyes and let tears finally fall. 2 days after the births, while Eva recovered and learned to feed 5 hungry mouths, Catherine Marsh made her move. She didn't wait for the scheduled hearing, couldn't risk Whitmore's lawyers bearing evidence in procedural delays. Instead, she walked into the offices of the Charleston Gazette with William's journal and 12 widows who traveled 3 days to tell their stories. The front page ran the next morning. Senator Whitmore accused in Mind Death's Widow's Journal reveals decade-long cover-up. By evening, every newspaper in 3 states had picked up the story. The journal's pages, photographed and printed, showed William's careful documentation. Dates, amounts, names of men who'd complained about safety and died days later. Pension fund transfers to accounts Whitmore controlled. The Federal Mining Commission had no choice but to fast-track the hearing. Whitmore tried to fight back. Called it slander, accused Eva of fabrication, claimed William had been unstable. But 12 widows stood in front of courthouse steps and told reporters the same story. Their husbands had complained, had been ignored, had died. The math was simple. 43 men dead. Millions stolen. One senator's lies unraveling in print. 3 weeks after the births, Catherine Marsh didn't send a telegram. She came in person. She arrived at dusk, travel-stained and exhausted, but her eyes were bright. Eva sat in the ground floor room, Lily sleeping in her arms, the other 4 babies in their cradles. Guilty, Catherine said without preamble. All counts, 20 years federal prison. The judge called it a betrayal of the working men whose labor built this nation. Whitmore's lawyers tried to appeal. The judge denied it from the bench. The 12 widows who'd gathered in the lodge's common room heard the news and wept. Not just for justice delivered, but for husbands who'd never see it. For years lost to grief and poverty and the weight of unanswered questions. Eva held Lily tighter. William should be here. He is, Catherine said quietly. Every word of that journal was read into the record. The judge quoted him directly, "Good men deserve better." That's what turned the jury. Your husband's voice, finally heard. Outside, the 12 widows embraced. Inside, 5 babies slept unaware they'd been born into a world slightly more just than the one their father had left. Spring came to the mountains. The snow melted, revealing ground that had been frozen since November. In the settlements, people talked about the widow who'd carried 5 babies through winter, about the clanlord who'd rebuilt his lodge to save them, about the senator who'd gone to prison for killing miners. The stories grew in the telling, became legend, were passed down to children who'd tell their own children someday. But in Northern Crown Territory, life was simpler. Eva worked as the lodge's primary midwife, delivered babies for women across 3 counties, trained younger midwives in techniques she'd learned through hard experience, raised 5 children who grew stronger each day. Blackwood ran his territory with the same methodical precision he'd applied to the Reconstruction. Fair but firm, just but not cruel. The kind of leader people followed because they trusted him, not because they feared him. The 12 widows who'd testified stayed in Northern Crown Territory, their families folded into the Klan's protection. Their children grew up alongside Eva's 5, learning that justice sometimes required patience but always required courage. Thomas Waverly went on to redesign foundations across Appalachia, preventing countless deaths from flawed construction. He never charged the families of miners. Jacob Renfield, who'd opposed the Reconstruction, quietly sold his trade routes and moved to Lexington. The other council members never spoke his name again. And sometimes in the evenings, Eva and Blackwood would sit together in the room where she'd nearly died, where 5 babies had been born against impossible odds, where foundations had been torn down and rebuilt better than before. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. Some things were understood without words. 3 years passed. On the anniversary of the Reconstruction's completion, Eva walked to the Eastern Foundation. The new stones gleamed pale in the afternoon sun. Limestone that carried no iron, created no fields, threatened no lives. Blackwood found her there. "You're thinking," he said. "I'm remembering. 3 years ago, I thought this was the end. Thought I'd die here and take my children with me. But you didn't. No, we fought, we rebuilt, we survived." She turned to face him. 3 years, that was the deal. And Eva looked back at the foundation, at the stones that represented impossible choices and harder work, and refusing to accept defeat. "I think," she said slowly, "that some foundations are worth keeping, worth maintaining, worth building a life on." Blackwood stepped closer. "Is that a yes?" "That's a maybe that's leaning toward yes. Ask me again in a year." He laughed. The sound echoed off the new stones. "I can work with that too." Inside the lodge, 5 children played under Granny Oaks's watchful eye. Abigail and Constance building elaborate structures from wooden blocks. Nathaniel and Samuel racing toy horses across the floor. Lily, the smallest, sitting quietly and watching everything with those same wide, curious eyes she'd had since birth. They were 3 years old now, healthy, bright, already showing the fierce independence they'd inherited from their mother. They would grow up knowing their father had died fighting for justice, that their mother had survived impossible odds to bring them into the world, that a stranger had become family by choosing compassion over tradition. And they would know that sometimes the strongest foundations were the ones you built yourself, after you tore down everything that came before. The mountain wind whispered through the pines. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called. The sound carried across valleys and ridges, past settlements and hollows, reaching toward futures not yet written, but already taking shape. In Northern Crown territory, 5 children laughed. And that sound was sweeter than any justice, stronger than any revenge, more lasting than any legend. It was simply life, continuing, despite everything.